everyone. Welcome to another episode of 10 Forward Weekly. My name is Mike Fadum. This camera is too low and cutting off the top of my head. And I am your community manager, also known as Ambassador Kel. And I am joined on this lovely Captain Kirk Went to Space for Reals This Time day by two members of our three-person systems team. Ladies and gentlemen, it's that way Jonathan Herlosh and Jeremy Randall. Hello.
Yay! Thunderous applause.
Yes, absolutely thunderous. Are you already answering questions in chat, Jeremy?
What? No, I didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. I see you. So welcome, folks. This is where we've been doing these streams about like what the different what's that word I'm looking for? What the different jobs, I guess, disciplines are in game development, specifically for Star Trek, for the last little while. But systems, I think, is interesting because it's the one that they probably have the best idea of what y'all do, because y'all make the numbers do the number things, right?
That
yes.
we do. We manually ensure the smooth functioning of math.
Yep.
If
Every
1
time
+ 1
you-
= 3, it's their fault.
Every time you activate a phaser, a little piece of paper comes across our desk, and we have to validate the entire formula, and then we slide it off to the side to tell you how much damage it does.
They're very fast.
Yep.
Just extremely quick. Now, what is
Mhm.
so? I know that it's a lot of the math and a lot of the like determining, like you said, damage or the effectiveness of different powers or designing different powers. But in you folks' words, what would you say a systems designer does? Jonathan, go first.
Well, first, number must go up. That's very important. Let's see. We make the toys that the player plays with and the challenges that they have to face, like the specific enemies or the specific fights. Arranging these things together is usually more of content's forte, but what we do is make sure that the powers are fun and fair, that things like look like how they feel like, how they play like, how they feel like they should. Like that there's a sort of a synergy between the idea of something and the way it's expressed in the game. So that way, if you use a phaser on someone, it has a stun setting. It by and large does what you expect a phaser to do. A torpedo works the way you think it should work, that kind of stuff. That's the sort of like, I don't know, indescribable satisfaction element of a game where things just kind of connect between your intent and outcome in a way that feels good. And then on the flip side, the more obvious part of it is balance, and that the math of your powers works out, and that like no one energy type is dominant forever, and like different builds are viable, and the more visible aspects of systems.
Yeah, and that often means because we have a player base that's fairly convinced they know the best way to make a ship, and it's 5.3 and is a tactical ship, I assume. Actually, no, it's probably a science ship these days, isn't it? With a bunch of black hole generators or whatever.
Probably.
But you folks have to, as you're designing stuff, not just feed into quote unquote the meta, but feed into anything anybody might want to play in our Star Trek theme park. How do you approach that?
Well, that's something that we do on a pretty much day-to-day basis. I think almost every single day, somebody on our team is having to come up with a new idea of something that we want to put into the game. Either it's a new console or a new trait or a new kit module or something that players will end up in one way or another interacting with. Honestly, we have a few pretty simple principles that start the process, and one of those is usually let's make sure it's fun. I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but that's really where it needs to start from. We don't really want to implement stuff. We never set out to implement stuff that's frustrating. But let's be honest, sometimes that's where we end up. But that's not where we start.
Looney Welch.
Shout out to Mine Layers.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would absolutely fly a 010 ship. I would love to try that. That would be really fun, especially if you go on a Herc map.
Mm-hmm. So many people get kind of hung up on the forward weapon slots, but then you slot it with at least half omni beams, and it doesn't matter anymore. So, Yeah, think about that when you're looking at your next ship.
I missed it because it scrolled by. Oh, Sean Kennedy says he's always stoked to see you, Jeremy. Which,
Ha!
we see what
Thanks.
you did there.
Thanks for the callback.
Oh, Jonathan's
Bye, John.
leaving. All right, cool.
He has to go do some math.
That makes sense.
I was just sick of that fluorescent light making me look like a ghast or something. I don't have a tan, but like, oh, now I'm like bluish. Well. Shows you how often I use this webcam thing.
Let's see, folks. If you're, I know you're kidding, but I'm not going to pass on anything you say trashing particular systems decisions in the game.
Don't worry, I'm reading it anyway.
I know.
And also, we probably already know.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
We don't think we're perfect, not by any long stretch of the imagination.
But also, there are some things. And I've seen this before, and I've played with this before. There are some things, like some builds that are, looked at and considered quote-unquote trash by the player base. But then you take them out and fly them, and they're really fun. It's just not going to get you, I don't know what the higher limits are now, 7,100K DPS and ISA, but...
It's somewhere around e to the power of pi.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think that's what Augie got in his last video.
Yeah.
Zatvash Thought says he thinks you're perfect, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Also, apparently
You're wrong.
Apparently the consensus from chat, Jonathan, is that even though you're a systems designer, which means we keep you in the basement, you have a velvety radio voice.
Well, I appreciate that.
I did notice that. The first time I talked to John in person, I was like, oh, I see. All right, Trexpert, you might have to be more specific with this question. We'll try. I'll pass it on anyway. What they want to know what the most challenging system to design is, and I think they mean design from the ground up. But I'm going to flip that on its head and say, what's the most challenging part of the game to do your job with? Like, what part of it do you end up beating your head against the wall the most?
I'm daily have challenges with different aspects of this. I think, honestly, the ideation process of anything that we do in the systems design discipline is always, is becoming harder and harder because A, we've already done it, and B, we don't actually know if it's fun. So those are usually in conflict with one another, and sometimes they're alongside one another. Like, hey, I have this cool idea for a thing that explodes in a flat ring, and I want to do it in space, but space is 3-dimensional. So is a flat ring fun? Well, we've also already done that, and so coming up with the ideas of what to do.
What you need is 6 different flat rings on different planes.
Which we also sometimes refer to as a sphere.
What?
So, I mean, just brainstorming is a stumbling point in any of the design process for anything we make. Because you never know if the ideas that you have in your brain are going to translate into good gameplay. But on the flip side, if it does, and you know that, there's in a 12-year-old game, 11, 10, how old are we? It's very likely we've already done something extremely similar, if not identical.
Yeah.
So then the space kind of becomes like, how do we make it different? Or do we want to do it at all? Have we already, plumbed this well?
I kind of have a similar answer for that. Very much it's the size, the sheer size of the game, like, catches up with you in strange ways. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's the differences between, like, okay, this is what we'd like to do. This is the design scope. This is how confident we are in the changes. Like, usually as a designer, the technical implementation of things is not going to be the big blocker. But with Stowe, there's a lot of, like, sort of legacy decisions where anytime you want to touch a system or update a system, you have to ask the mystery question of, like, okay, when this was designed 7 years ago by someone who no longer works here and is currently hidden somewhere on Hoth, what did they do?
Please, Andorra.
And no, it's so far away, it's in a different franchise. And sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes they made the system very forwards thinking and very compatible, and other times it's I don't know, take your pick, melee ground combat. It's something that's like a nightmare to change, and we can only do little things around the margin, but we can't really get in there and change anything fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think a big example of that is our duty officer system, which is very robust,
like a nightmare to
very has a lot of features to it, a lot of space to explore for the players and everything. But that all of those various variables make it that much harder for us as designers to step into that playground and to make new things that play with the whole system in a way that the original designers actually, of which I'm one, I'm guilty of this. This is some of my past decisions come back to haunt me. Like it makes it difficult to do new features in that system that feel like a part of the system instead of just feeling like this little tiny thing that we tacked on.
Yeah, well, and it's all, even, giving you a little bit of a break, Jeremy. It's like the philosophy of game design has changed so much in the last 10 to 12 years that, like, when we were starting STO, it was a lot more of like, gamers want complexity. Let's give them systems that have 14 different layers and like all this other stuff, and like, raids that you can fail that take 4 hours to complete and things like that. And now we're much more on the like, we know you guys log in to play on your lunch break, and we want you to be able to do that. Yeah.
Some of that is also a matter of like, after a game is released, it really belongs to a large part to the players in many regards. And the longer a game lives and has an established fan base, an established set of expectations from the players, the more it kind of becomes their decisions that drive the further development. Never completely, because game designer is going to design, but we have to kind of bow to that. And I think somewhere along the way, when STO was first being built, it was going to be an MMO, and that meant we were going after models like World of Warcraft and EverQuest and the big ones of its age. But over time, our player base turned out to be much more casual, much more interested in different types of experiences than what those games offered. Which is probably one of the reasons we're still around.
Yeah.
A lot of MMOs also like fall into this sort of theme park space. Like Final Fantasy XIV is probably the clearest example, where there's 8 trillion systems and a million things to do, and they're all kind of non-rival. You can just kind of pick and choose. The thing that gets in our way is we have to make sure that something we make is enjoyed by enough people to interact with, and that makes the crunchier, higher end combat, like, we have to come up with ways to like modify existing content, because we can't really make a purpose-built raid that's supposed to be very hard anymore.
Right.
Like, we can turn something that's supposed to be general access into something that's hard, but we can't build it from the ground up to be crunchy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's actually another example of kind of what I was talking about, is that we have a good number of players who kind of buy into what I would call in broad scopes a power fantasy that we've managed to build up kind of an expectation of among our players, that you can find these weird synergies in our games, that using this console with these other consoles, with this trait, with this ship, will give you this mishmash of numbers that we've never imagined. And frankly, never intended. But now it's out there, it's in the hands of players. And the more that we continue to do that, whether on purpose or by mistake, the more we've built that into an expectation. And the more we have to continue to make sure that players that are here for that are going to continue to be satisfied with the new stuff that we offer.
Yeah, and we also have, I talk about this in the stream a lot. We have a thing that I initially thought was very strange, but I'm actually swiftly learning by talking to other like community managers and stuff. It's pretty typical, where we have this invisible swath of our player base that never like comes on a stream or interacts on Twitter, and so like, if we build just for what the folks in chat want, we might risk alienating this huge part of the player base that we don't get to interact with, but wants very specific things, and we can tell from the data that we track of them what they want.
Yeah, and we've been trying to get better about looking at the invisible players too, and trying to mesh what we think we're seeing. Analytics is honestly far more subjective than I think some people realize. Like, you can ask it questions. You can make the data tell you the answers that you want a lot of the time.
Yeah.
If you're asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
So,
and then we have a person whose job it is to ask the right questions for the company.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
For
the more narrow, like niche audience stuff, we try to do what we can as well. And usually that's like for PvP, for example, it's sort of watching for newer releases that we think, oh, this can be skewed to help a problem with PvP. But that depends on how visible and in particular grokkable it is.
Mhm.
Like PvP is one that's really hard to crack into because it's very delicate. Small changes go a really long way, and it's almost incomprehensible. Like you really have to do a deep dive and read like not just parses, but also like play a lot of PvP, talk to PvPers to get a feel for it. Because if you just try to bullet point list the problem, you have like, you know, giant alpha strikes kind of pushing against invulnerability powers and
Mhm.
like ridiculous sustained DPS that isn't that different from an alpha strike and like cloaking and what does the ecosystem actually want or need? It's in such a like tangled space that I don't know. My personal approach is to try to chip away at it, like look for powers that can counter some of the existing PvP nonsense, but
Mhm.
mainly it's just trying to understand at this point. That's the
In that
phase I'm
regard,
in, is
it
like figure
usually,
out what in the heck is happening in that jungle.
yeah, in that regard, it usually ends up being more of an arms race than a balancing act
Yeah.
for us.
And PvP right now, I mean, a lot of people were saying today about PvP because it was the universal endeavor. Like, oh, well, see how many people are playing PvP. If you put good rewards, people will play it. But looking at the chat in game, a ton of people were saying, oh, God, I logged into a PvP match, got blown up at spawn every time. It was miserable. I'm never doing that again. Thank God I only have to do it once. So, like,
When
if we were ever to do an overhaul to PvP to make it fun, we probably would have to make it less fun for the people who now currently really enjoy the PvP in our game, because it would be about making it so that anybody could jump in, not just, a god killer build.
Well, it needs
this
an overhaul, right? Like
kinda
it
goes,
needs to be rebooted in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
or
right.
at least designed. like a designer needs to look at it and go,
Mhm.
I would like this time to kill. I would like these, vague play styles to exist, or at
Yeah.
least describe what already exists.
I think what it comes down to is that PvP is built on flawed fundamentals, which is that our game is designed around a player ship having this type of performance and an enemy NPC having this kind of opposite performance,
Yeah.
which are not the same animal. So when you take half of that equation away and make it just this side versus the same side, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different set of numerical computations and possible
Yeah.
synergies and possible equipment and all that sort of thing. And it was never designed to do that. I think the only way that we could change what PvP is in STO is to make it something different, so that the presumptions about what a player is need to be different in a PvP space on both sides of that fence. On if you're going to fight two players against each other, they can't be what current players are.
Yeah. A lot of people
and part
have
of the reason
suggested
for that is otherwise, if we tried to actually change what players can do or how they perform, we would end up changing PvE so drastically that we could potentially alienate all the players that don't play PvP.
Right. And if
yeah.
a lot of people have suggested like like you can get there's a selection of pre-built ships, and those are the only ones you can use in PvP, and we can balance those. But then that's a whole another can of worms, because we have to
It's a
design
second
all of these
game.
ships. Yeah, it's making a second game.
Well, and if you do it alongside the existing content, then you're kind of splitting your audience. And if you replace the existing content, then you're going to alienate the people who already enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
that's why I feel like I'm in more of a caretaker role with it.
Yeah.
Like, I want to learn as much as I can and then do small changes that nudge it in the right direction and don't seismically upset the like bizarre ecosystem that does exist.
Yeah. Nick Norris says assign point values to known player gear / traits and create player matching based on the points of your builds. We already do that. That's one of the ways that TFOs get matched up. It was introduced, I think, around when we did the EVP update.
Yeah, season 17, 18, somewhere around there.
So it's under the hood, but
it's also
so few people play
not,
PvP. It's not gonna really put you matched with somebody your skill level, because there aren't enough people to match you with.
Yeah, it's also admittedly it's not a perfect system. Every console of Mark 14 purple is valued the exact same as one another, even though obviously there are variances to how much those things value and how much they are worth to a particular build. For example, if you've got all gold Mark 15 torpedo damage consoles, but not a single torpedo on your ship, you're not getting anything from that, but they're valued the same as if you had the correct type of tactical console on your ship.
Yeah.
So the gear, that's one of the reasons that we never actually ended up exposing it to players. We do use it to try and get like a range of relative gear score value for you for PvE and for the competitive queues. That's how they try to matchmake. But it's an estimate.
Yeah.
It's
Lord Leopold Burrow, I understand you are the what's the word I'm looking for? Not
passionate.
orator. No, what's the word for the person who speaks for everybody?
The mouthpiece.
I guess.
The community manager.
Yeah, sure. You're the PvP community manager. That sounds good.
The Lorax?
Yeah, the Lorax of PvP. He speaks for the PvP because the PvP has no tongues. But we're not gonna devote the entire stream to talking about PvP. I have seen your repeated requests to talk about the fact that there is a typo in the competitive marks rewards in the reputation guide that says you can get competitive marks from playing PvP. I haven't told the systems team to fix that typo because I'm hoping to do as you ask and convince the higher-ups to make those marks part of the PvP system. But that sort of convincing takes time.
Yeah, when I talk about little nudges, I'm not talking about tweaking placate times. This would be stuff like adding a power that strips enemy debuffs that happens to interact with invulnerability debuffs, like something that has a little effect in PvE, but a larger targeted effect at PvP. The problem is that I don't feel like I have the expertise to move forward.
Yeah.
So, I'm just spending the time that I can learning about PvP and trying to understand what the ecosystem would actually want. Because the problem is any change we make, pretty sure we're not going to be able to follow it up very quickly. So we have to be very confident before we ship it.
Yep.
Nebshake90 says all the PvPers already cut each other's tongues out. That's why they can't speak. Just to briefly respond to something I see a lot because I want to make sure this explanation gets out there. And why am I so bad at words today? Spread it around. Matt August is talking about wanting STO to have a engine upgrade to perhaps switch STO out to the Unreal Engine. That is what you're asking us to do there is rebuild the game. There's literally from the ground up, recreate everything. All of the art assets, all of the systems, everything. You can't just lift STO off of the Cryptic engine that it's currently on and place it on Unreal. It's like, that would probably be like a 1 to 2 year process at least, and we would not be able to make any other content while we were doing it. And I don't think the returns would be worth it. So I love the idea in theory, but we no. But I want to ask this more specific question about what we're here to talk about today, rather than just diving into everything in chat. So I'm going to give you a specific example, Jonathan, and I want to talk about the process of designing a system. In this case, because it's one of my favorite things, I want to talk about your Pokemon power. Can you talk us through, because that was such a cool and unique idea for the game, can you talk us through the process of creating that? And don't be afraid to get technical on us. They love that. From coming up with the idea to implementing it in the lockbox.
All right, I can absolutely do that. I'm seeing a lot of chat things that I'd love to respond to, and I don't have a chat account. Do you mind if I squeak a couple in quick before I launch into that?
Sure.
I keep getting asked to read something. I don't know if I can get through that with a straight face. That's one. Subnuke 2 Electric Boogaloo is essentially one of the things that's on my radar. Pushing the power of that seems like it wouldn't screw with PvE that much and could be interesting or positive in PvP. Yeah. And then, God, Unreal would be amazing, but that would be 10 years of work. Yeah. So the Bond with Life power. I knew when I was watching the show that I'm like, oh, yes, this will be in the game. The moment I saw him do something with the animal there, with the, I think the first time we saw it was with the Transworm.
Yeah, the straight-up druid craft.
Right? The thing with that was I basically designed it to be very extensible. I went to leadership with this idea I had, and I was like, okay, I can make this as a trade in a lockbox, but we can also make it grow up big and strong, and it's just however much time we want to put into it. Because I figured Yeah, it would take a lot more systems time than a normal trait. I mean, obviously, something that's like Terran targeting systems, I crit more, yay! Like that doesn't take very long. And making, I think it cut down to like 21 by release, but at start like 26 different animal pets that like feel different and are meaningfully gameplay different. Like that is more time. And it also has like a few quirks. Like there's a Klingon only pet still because we haven't found a place to like stick the animal where everyone can get to it, but we still intend to. And eventually we would like to make. I think I heard a proposal for like a new Red Alert or something that has it in there. But the idea was that if we started with something that could be a trait, then we could build onto it and then ship with whatever we felt comfortable with without necessarily locking ourselves into delivering a giant expensive project, or more commonly dealing with scope creep. Because obviously the request came in like, it would be cool to have non-combat pets like a monkey or something, the Rysian animals. It would be awesome to have different kinds of animals, and like what counts as an animal. No kill eye hordas are smart, but they kind of feel like they could be one of these. So it's just navigating all these decisions and sort of figuring out what we could deliver at a quality bar we were happy with, and then that balanced against rule of cool and how much people like it. So for a trait like Bond with Life, we assume players will be happier to have more pets to play with, and are willing to put up with the fact that some of them look a little older, or that like it doesn't necessarily make sense to summon an Ayla worm everywhere you can get an Ayla worm to appear, because the fun factor makes up for that, similar to like orbital bombardment happening inside a building.
I think actually a really good example of this is that you set the whole thing up with a prototype using a contact for management. And it just comes up like you're talking to somebody, and you choose dialogue options essentially to set up the trait power. And I remember early on in the process, we were like, yeah, this works, but don't we want to make it something better? Shouldn't this have its own UI element or something where you can highlight see all your unlocks and you get a catalog? And but that's I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying. Like, it was the payoff there. We're just making a trait that's modular. If the Bond with Life trait ended up being the new game in STO that everybody loved playing, then maybe we can go back and make a UI for it.
Yeah.
You designed something so modular, so in a way that ended up making the trait that seems risky at first. And I remember telling you left and right, like, we shouldn't be doing this, John. This is going to take too much time.
It's the code on the back end for it is pretty spicy too. It does everything with like hidden numerics. Like that trait created 30 new secret currencies,
and more each time we want to add a new monster.
One of the extensible features on it is actually leveling up individual pets. It's capable of supporting that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, but that's actually
there's I keep hearing that there's like a mantid or something, like the kit performance pet. I hear different things that like
it doesn't exist.
Right, and that's another one where I think that would be pretty easy to just add to new Romulus ground, but it's one of those things where every couple development cycles we get something called a checkpoint week where we can use to deal with stuff like this. And next time I get checkpoint time, which is probably in like a month or so, I intend to take a look at it, because obviously kit performance is a pretty core stat. So
yeah.
But it was interesting what you said about the UI element and stuff like that, because there's a lot of times in designing anything, but especially systems, where we can kind of get in our own way, where we'll be like, I talk about on the stream before about how, everybody who works on this game is so passionate about Star Trek that they really want to make everything that we make the absolute top of the line, best possible version of it. And then sometimes that leads to us, instead of putting something together like the Bond with Life trait that, may not have the most perfect UI in the world, but works and is fun, and putting it on the back burner because, we don't have time to make this perfect, so we're not going to do it.
Right.
So I really appreciate, John, that you've just finished that idea rather than taking it and letting it go crazy out of control and scope-wise.
I think there's a saying that sometimes comes up in game dev that you can't always let the perfect be the enemy of the done.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to ship something that might be 80 to 90% that's fun, and accept some of the lumps along the way, especially with something like I was trying to get across the point that the Bond with Life trait and all of its functionality is extremely modular, and we can potentially add on, polish, all sorts of stuff like that in the future.
It's almost like John's a good designer and knows what he's doing.
Almost.
Not quite. It's an asymptote.
All right. So Jeremy, we talk about ship design a lot on this here show, but I don't think we've ever really gone into what it is you do when you are designing and massaging the stats of a ship. Is it like I haven't? I mean, I've looked at the menu where I think you do the work, but is it just like a big internal spreadsheet that you're just like changing numbers and then going into the game and firing a phaser and seeing what happens?
It's some of that. I actually think that because of the size of our ship catalog and the age of the game, there are probably players out there who could design a ship just as well as I can. I think that that's an absolute truth, because the bulk of what I do when laying down what a ship is going to be, what its stats are going to be like, is just comparative analysis. It's taking a look at our existing catalog of ships and trying to figure out what ships already exist that are out there that are the ones that I intend for this new one to be compared against, and then seeing where they sit, seeing how they perform, and what their actual number crunches are look like. And I put them into a spreadsheet. Yes, it's all Excel based, and then I decide what ours is going to look like. Now, the actual implementation of ships is honestly a little bit overly complex, archaic. It's not a system that does everything that we want it to now, and does a lot more than is ever going to be used. I think that's true of a lot of our tools. They're extremely powerful. We use like this much of it, and one of those things that we actually do it for, it doesn't do very well.
I was just thinking it's funny watching chat and running an interview at the same time, because it sometimes feels like I'm talking to you guys while 10,000 people stand right behind me and go, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. But to
And
answer
then
your
time
question,
delay.
I know. But to answer your question, Ethan Finch, the problem that you posted about on PS4 should be fixed now, because the Frankenbuild just went out. Someone else on Facebook posted, what the heck? The servers just went down on PS4. Yeah, it's called a Frankenbuild. And what we're doing is we are taking the servers down briefly so we can apply new code to fix the issue that went out this morning with the EV suits. With some tech going live early, I'll just say, without saying too much more, that caused some problems because it wasn't finished.
Yeah.
And actually, that's an interesting, because one of the things that you guys have to deal with all the time is fixing bugs that pop up. And in hunting down the issue with the EV suits this morning, you and I and Justin, our producer, discovered that it wasn't affecting all EV suits, only certain EV suits. So when there's a problem like that, what's the process of diving in to try and find where in the data it went wrong?
Well, this is one of the reasons that we try to get as much detail as possible anytime that a bug report comes across. The first report that I got this morning was my EV suit does not work.
Yeah.
Which could have been 3,000 different things. And so that the very next thing is, which EV suit are you wearing? So I can figure out if that's the problem. Where were you? What do you mean by doesn't work? Is it completely missing? Has the item been deleted? There's a whole list of stuff that we need to figure out the details of what does it's not working mean before we can even figure out what's not working.
Yeah, which is
Before
why
we
I
can
always
even
say, by
start.
the way, the more that you can tell me what's going wrong, the better. The reason that we were able to make progress on that bug today and get it fixed today is because people in chat in game were like, "Hey, Kel, it's my EV suit is being replaced by the default suit. It's happening on this asteroid belt when I do this," and I was able to just shuffle that off to Jeremy, and that was super helpful.
Yep. By having a solid place and an isolated instance of how I could make it happen, I could very quickly see exactly what went wrong.
Yeah.
And QA actually reproed it almost simultaneous to my repro. They're on the ball.
Yeah.
I think that honestly one of the most difficult things to deal with today was the fact that we had so many people trying to fix this,
Yeah.
and not everybody was talking to everybody. So he led like 3 people in QA looking at it. You were looking at it. Justin was there are
Yep.
2 software engineers. I was on it.
I kept trying to
Al got
combine the
involved
different
at some
chats,
point.
and then some people got pulled off into other chats.
Yeah.
And, like emails were flying.
Yeah. But we got to the bottom of it, I think, pretty well. And I think we're doing an actual data patch on PC soon.
Friday is what I've heard, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah.
Things might change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, not to, because we don't talk about things we haven't released yet, but that was a piece of something that is likely to come out later.
And it's a cool thing.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Bugs with exact STR that developers can actually see as well. Those are really great. I don't know what STR means, but
Steps to reproduce, I'm sure.
Ah, yes. Yeah. The more reproduction steps you could give us on any bug you find, please.
Also, like, what is actually I've seen some really well-meaning bug reports from players that are like, when I do this, and then this happens, and it's broken, and they don't actually tell me what's wrong. Take it all the way, please.
Tell us what you expect to happen as well. The bug report. I think there's a forum on the forums, although I don't think anybody actually follows it. And there's there's a forum we use internally, but it's basically like, what was happening when you encountered the bug? Tell us all the steps you got to encounter the bug, usually from like turning on the game down to where it is, and then what did you expect to happen and what actually happened. And if you guys could give us all of that info, my God, we will love you forever.
Yeah. Also, you'll get quicker fixes.
Yeah.
So it helps us both.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
If we ever do a whale probe ship, we're going to have to do a shield or like a material for it that makes it look like a Vaseline tube, just because Fragrance Free Vaseline asks about it every stream. None of you work on materials and things like that, but...
I've done 0 art that's made it into our game.
That's true, because you didn't win the ship
I
contest.
didn't actually enter that one.
That's right,
but
I forgot.
Really? No designer art particles where you at least like hue shifted some stuff and combined some things?
Well, that's not art. That's just changing. That was actually math.
What is
Because if we
art?
hue shift, we're changing a number value.
Well, hue shifting is one thing, but when you combine them together, that starts to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, you might have me there.
It's
So-
an arrangement, a bouquet.
Here's an interesting question, although I have to correct you, Trexpert, really quickly. Reducing the amount of turrets and best served coals that would run better on console was actually a content designer thing, not a systems thing, because that's actually going into the map and removing objects. But when you guys are designing system stuff, I assume you have to keep in mind how it's going to play on console. How do you prepare for that, and what sort of stuff do you have to do to make that work?
Well, STO's been around long enough that we know some of the foibles and pitfalls of our engine. We have a pretty good little hit list that at least Jonathan and I have learned over like tribal knowledge at this point. We're trying to teach Scott as he comes on board. Scott's our other new systems designer. I think he was on here last week.
Yeah.
So like there's certain things that we have to keep in mind for if a power is doing certain operations too quickly. And then if we have a place where we can potentially have 10 players on the map all running the power at the same time, performance stuff that we have to keep in mind generally is back end. It doesn't really have anything to do with visual performance or graphics fidelity or frames per second or anything like that. Not on the client, but I have been known to break server firm frames per second in the past.
Did you guys know, because I found this out early on in my career, that if you use the command to stop time while you're on a server that other people are on, it stops time for everyone, not just you?
Yes, that is not a client command.
No. I was trying to use it to take pictures during a playtest of a TFO, and after like the 3rd time, somebody was like, "Who's stopping everything? Please stop doing that."
You know, that used to be not such a problem when we were all playtesting in the playtest room.
Yeah.
You know?
This was actually at our desks, but I'm next to QA, so they could just groundhog stand up and be like, or meerkat stand up and be like, "What's going on?"
Yeah. We used to sometimes run into server side stuff like that. Like if you were having multiple players test out an episode, technically you're all running on the same game server, just in different what do we call them, partitions. So the mission logic is partitioned out. But if you use certain server commands like initialize map, that affects the entire server, not just your partition. So
Don't do that.
don't do that, please.
Folks are saying I'm quiet. I apologize. I'm shoving the mic as far into my mouth as possible, but I'm all the way turned up on my end, so there's not much more I can do there. I can't read your name. Ares Shrek? Huh. I kind of want to know the story behind that name. But anyway, what we were testing on Tribble the other day when we did the Jem'Hadar invasion of Deep Space Nine, we have noticed of late that sometimes NPCs are following their what's called a beacon, which is what tells them where to go on the map. But in following it, will just jump through walls or disappear to the other sides of impassable force fields they're not supposed to be getting through. This was first noticed in the final battle of the Klingon Civil War because bridge officers were jumping through the force fields and getting to fight Gempok and stuff before they were supposed to be able to. And so we've been our programmer Keith, one of our two programmers, has been sorry, someone in chat said they still dream about me every night, and that totally threw off my train of thought. Okay.
Well,
Hello there.
General Kenobi.
But they what was I talking about?
Pathfinding beacons.
Pathfinding. Yes. Okay. So we there basically we discovered that NPCs, we call them critters, had the ability to teleport through space through impassable spaces.
We call it emergency pathfinding.
Emergency
apparently.
pathfinding. Okay. There's this feature called emergency pathfinding that allowed them to teleport to where they were supposed to go if they couldn't find a way to get there. And so, if it thought the beacon was telling it to get on the other side of the wall, zoop, it'll jump over there. Alexa, stop. So what
This
we
is
were doing
also like players. I've seen the reports of like I got to this step where I'm supposed to kill all the whatevers, but I can't find any more. Likely they're on the other side of a wall.
Yeah, one of them's in a wall somewhere. And so what we did on Tribble the other day, what we were asking folks to test after the DS9 invasion, was we turned that emergency pathfinding feature off for everything, for every map in the game. And we wanted people to play through different story missions to see if they would break in unexpected ways, because since this emergency pathfinding thing has existed for so many years, what we don't know is if we turn it off, will then some missions that have accidentally relied on it for years break? Because sometimes there might be critters who need to go to point B and have been blocked for years, but we would never know because emergency pathfinding just teleports them there. And if they don't if they can't teleport anymore, might get stuck here, which would mean that the mission progression is blocked. So we're trying not to cause more problems by fixing a problem.
Yeah. Trying to be responsible with ripping out old code.
Yeah.
Also, I totally agree with
Says
Cthulhu.
emergency pathfinding sounds like a meta trait. That actually does. That would be a neat multi-teleport power. Y'all should do that.
Mm-hmm.
If we ever do another Pathfinder.
If Thomas has his way, I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
He loves that ship.
Is there Legendary Vindictus says, is there just one person in QA eternally doing the story quests over and over? No, but what we do have is we have an external group. I believe they're called Applause. That does some of that. What was that, Josh?
It's connected to something in chat.
Now I have to read chat to figure out why you were pointing at your nose. Trexpert, you guys, that's more of a Western animation thing, right? The fact that ships don't warp out sometimes when they're supposed to.
Yeah, that's animation, and actually, I'm pretty sure Weston's looked into it and can't figure it out, because it also has to do with some of our very first beta iteration cutscene code.
Yeah.
Before we figured out that we actually wanted to put cutscenes into the game, and made them good.
Which is mostly thanks to Weston, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, like literally, there's like two different branches, if I understand correctly, where like demo record it runs things a certain way, and it's an iteration of that first generation, and then there's good stuff that was used for the cutscene editor.
Yeah.
And there's some crossover, but anyway.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Dragon Turtle Timmy, that sounds like a heck of a bug, and it sounds like one of our commands may have become a higher access level than it's supposed to be. So please
No,
go report
actually,
that on the forums, so we could.
Funny enough, I know exactly what's wrong with that.
Oh yeah. Okay. Good.
It has to do with the feature that almost went out today. That should not have.
Oh. Well, you're breaking
Yeah.
everything, Jeremy.
I know.
With one stroke of many weeks of work.
A lot of these things, unfortunately, are across the line from systems into software.
And production as well. Like, just to give a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain, like one of the reasons that we've had, like the stuff that went out live today that shouldn't have, was partly because we had an emergency, what's called a baseline, happen like 2 or 3 weeks ago because some other software issues could not get addressed otherwise. So a new code branch was built, and it took in everything that had been changed up to that point in STO and built a new live version out of it, a live build. And then that included the very early iterations of a feature that is not supposed to be out there yet. And so we actually had to go through and kind of surgically remove some of that to make sure that build would work on live servers, in order to make it so that the build could be made at all. And so we've kind of been, we thought we had all of that basically fixed. And then today's build went out and with one little oopsie.
Yeah.
That we still had to surgically remove again.
So let's see. Cthulhu wants to know what sounds like a very simple question, and I'm sure the answer is not. What is the difference between systems and software?
Do you need a programmer to do it? They're very expensive, and it's hard to find them. If you need a programmer to do it, it's software. If systems can do it, it becomes systems very quickly. Also, I love the Garrick idea. That is such a good idea. So I was saying a hollow Garrick pet that gives you Tailor access.
You know why we can't do that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, All right. Well, I'll tell the player anyway, because the Tailor, for some reason, instead of having its own lighting, uses lighting based on the map you're in. So if you go into it, if you go into the Tailor on maps that aren't the places where we expect Tailors to be, you will probably end up not seeing your character, or they'll be super bright, or any number of other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also maps that don't load character costume data in the same way. So exposing the Tailor in places where it shouldn't be exposed could break all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
There is a longer form answer to the systems and software thing, too. I was a little bit glib there.
I was going to ask for that, so good. Go ahead.
Yeah, if it can be done in the tools we're given by software, like the game design editors that we have access to, that tends to be systems turf. But software engineers build us these things in, I don't know exactly what they work in, and I imagine C++, but I haven't actually checked. Do either of you know what language STO is in?
It's actually in a combination of C# and C++.
Okay. But yeah,
the cutoff is there.
Like north of 10 years ago, I got a degree in software engineering, and I sort of knew my way around C++, but that's not the same as what these guys are working with. And I'm just way too rusty. I physically couldn't do it. So, it just comes down to which tools you're working in as well. And then lastly, software engineers don't really learn the craft of game design. They learn the craft of software engineering, which is its own craft. And design, while being younger, it still has a great deal of craft knowledge to it. Like the difference between, learning enough to animate to make an image change into a different image versus learning enough to animate to know stretch and squash and, all the different other crazy animation craft things.
So apparently folks in chat don't know that exposure is a photography term, so I will say too bright and stop the overexposed in front of Garrick jokes that are coming in.
Is there such a thing? I mean, if it's up to Garrick.
Yeah, that's true. To even add on that a little bit more, what systems designers and content designers and even our artists do is work in the cryptic engines, cryptic tools. So like,
Mhm.
there'll be, for example, the spreadsheets we talked about earlier. There'll be like damage for weapon that you put in some formula that determines it based off of. But if something's broken enough or needs to be changed enough that you can't use the tool to fix it, somebody needs to go in and make the numbers and letters and the code changes. That's when we have to call Travis or Keith. And Travis and Keith
Yeah.
are insanely busy because there's always stuff that needs that, whether we want to build new features or whether we need to fix things that are already problems.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I think what John was saying is also on the nose. Like he or I could learn how to code, but that doesn't mean that we're going to know
Yeah.
how to properly build things for cryptic or for STO using the years and years of standards and precedents that are in place here. Conversely, like Keith, our head programmer, he comes up with some interesting design ideas every once in a while. Yeah, because he's a hardcore player of STO.
Yeah. Keith is
So-
one of you. Keith
Yeah,
is like
he's-
Keith is like the internal Augie. He's
Yeah.
the one who, when we get into a playtest, is like, well, my ship is too powerful. This was too easy, and I'm over
Yeah.
here in my pew pew boat going, but I died like 6 times.
Yeah. But if we wanted Keith to actually design something, it's very likely that he could probably come up with the first pass or so, but the systems designer would need to come in and clean up the data and make sure it doesn't break anything else that should be interacting with it, all those sorts of things. Knowing your craft and your discipline, and then also trusting other disciplines to know theirs is, I think, very important to game design when you're in a company that's even mid-size like Cryptic is. We need to be able to trust one another so that we can focus and make our own stuff
Yeah.
as good as we can.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question. There's actually 2 questions that I believe are related in terms of the how hard it would be. How hard would it be to do this? And both questions, I think, have a similar answer, so I'm going to pit them both at once. Universalizing ship consoles, so taking every ship console that's tied to a certain ship and making it universal, and changing the gender markers on every piece of clothing in the game. Can you
Gender?
explain? Yeah, well, like some things can only be worn by men and some things can only be worn by women. Can you go into why either of those might be a difficult and time-consuming process?
Shotgun the one that isn't clothes, because I know stuff about it.
Well, let me answer the costume one kind of real briefly, because that is actually not something that systems design has control over
that would be
historically.
character, and I was more leaning into both of those problems would involve manually editing hundreds of thousands of items.
Yeah, the clothing is not actually just gender locked. I don't know if it's been mentioned before, but technically, as far as our code is concerned, male and female are separate species, just as much as Vulcan and human and are different species as far as our code is concerned. So like human male is one thing, human female is another. In fact, Klingon faction human male is also a third, and Klingon faction human female would be a fourth. I don't think those are playable, but I think we have bridge officers that use those.
Yeah.
So anytime we have that sort of separation, that causes challenges for the character artist to actually do the data setup to build those. Art aside, like if we were just willing to unleash everything and let the clipping go wild, and invisible arms and all that kind of stuff, just let it go. Even just releasing all that stuff is not as easy as like unchecking boxes. It's actually manually adding data to each of those individual species. And again, by species, I also mean the individual genders of each species, pretty much by hand. I think there's talk of trying to get our character artists better tools for updating that, but that's
nice.
doesn't currently exist.
To answer your question, Musteroni, the fact that fed Klingons don't have access to the new cosmetic Klingon looks is probably not on purpose. It's probably that Ian, our character artist, was setting these up and did a million things and forgot that Klingons could also be Federation. So I will mention that to him and see if we can get that updated at some point. Yep.
But the other side of that, universalizing consoles, you want to field that one, Jonathan?
Sure. That's kind of more of a mix. Like it's nowhere near as forbidding in terms of the data work it would take, but it is a sizable data task. It's just doable instead of like, not realistic.
Yeah.
But it also comes with a host of weird precedent issues. Generally, if we made something to be exclusive to a ship and like people bought it, like often with real money because of features it has, including exclusivity, that introduces other hurdles. And then there's the issue of like, well, if we universalize all of them, we remove the ability to make anything locked to the ship anymore. So it's a thorny kind of interrelated issue of
Mhm.
precedent and promises made, and also just brute force data work. And
Yeah.
they combine together to make it a place where it's hard to want to throw dev hours.
Well, it becomes a place where we cannot give a definitive answer of like we're going to do that.
Oh yeah, it's also way over our helmet.
Yeah. There's just enough questions that are not something that any individual on the team can answer on their own, because many of the answers to those questions might mean somebody else has to do more work.
Yeah.
And that's rude.
Oh yeah. We can't write checks for ship art.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy. Yeah. Let's see. Wenlock wants to know, is whether an item is upgradable or not, or can be upgraded for free or to rank X. Just switch. Is that just switches that can be flipped in the item itself, or is that significantly less simple than it seems?
Somewhere between those two extremes. It's
Yeah, it's not
controlled
bad.
it's controlled by a series of somewhat complex config files, but
Controlled by a
changing
series
which
of tubes.
items use which sections of the config file isn't too bad. Yeah, so if there's something that's like a standout, this one item is super weird, I'd like to know about that. But if there's a whole set of items, like I know that I think it's all reputation items can't be re-engineered or something like that. Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at the JIRAs. Those are tasks that we would love to conquer someday, but we do want to do it a bit more wholesale rather than just piecemeal.
Yeah.
But if it's just one little thing that is piecemeal, let us know.
Yeah.
Maybe we can fix
Always
that.
let us know. Always let me know, and I've got a pretty good handle at this point on what's something that's worth passing on to the team and what's something that's just going to send everybody down a crazy rabbit hole that isn't really worth the time. So let me know. Especially let me know because these guys, I love them to death, but everybody in our team is so passionate about making a wonderful game that sometimes a fan will message them or they'll see a post on the unofficial Reddit that says it's official for some reason and say, say they'll go chasing after it and spend a whole day when they really should have been working on other stuff. So send it to me first so we can filter it.
Yeah. Or if you know how to get in touch with QA, they're good
too.
place
Yeah.
for that too.
Yeah, I know Christian has his own Discord just for people to report bugs to him, which I think is hilarious and wonderful.
Let me answer one question that's actually kind of related to what we were just saying about why warp cores and kit frames, I think, are not re-engineerable. So warp cores are because of a complexity to their design. They don't have an easy way to put into a spreadsheet and then just be able to run an RNG to spit out mods. We would actually have to massage that design a little bit, and that means rearranging existing items to fit into a structure of being able to be re-engineered. And it's not impossible, but it's time that we just haven't set aside for it. Kit frames are not re-engineerable because of primarily balance concerns. We're fully aware that the kit performance and kit readiness mods are way more desirable than anything else, and we don't want everybody in the world just running around with kit performance mods. Otherwise, we might as well not have that slot and just give you the skills instead. And we want to make sure that as much as possible, STO retains an element of choice in what you equip. If there's a best in slot that everybody agrees and there's no argument of what is best in slot, I consider that a failure for a systems design. We need to have choices for every single slot that goes on your paper doll, your status screen. Sorry, that's what we call your. Sorry.
You heard it here first, folks. Your starships are paper dolls, and as you've always known, you're just doing Space Barbie.
You're just playing Dollhouse.
Dollhouse. Yep. Here's an interesting question from Stu1701. In terms of, he's specifically asking about the crafting system, but in terms of updating a system like the crafting system or the duty officer system, if we wanted to take a system like that and make it, more modern or give it a redesign and overhaul, what would be involved in doing something like that?
Well, as it happens, I actually worked on a
Jonathan,
crafting system pitch. Whoa, something's going
Yeah.
crazy with
Oh, yeah.
Jeremy.
Jeremy just froze for a second there.
Sorry, I
It's
think
okay.
my internet has been having a bit of a fit. I'm okay.
Yeah. Looks like you were caught in like a time vortex. So yeah, I actually did a pitch for a crafting system rework. The first thing that happens is a pitch document. Someone does a lot of research, identifies where there's an opportunity to make a change, and then puts together, after doing a bunch of, bouncing it off other designers, puts together a document with like, okay, here's what we want to do, here's why we want to do it, and here's how much time and effort it would take to do it. And then that gets submitted and reviewed for approval. Unfortunately, Stowe isn't in a place where, like, because of the creeping cost of 10 years of like software work and etc. Like if this game was 8 years younger, the cost of changing the crafting system would be much lower. So each system rework like this gets more and more expensive. So the big
Can
hurdle
you
for us
explain what
is
you mean
like
by expensive there? Like
expensive
what
in
makes
terms of literal expense, like man hours,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit of a myth about the developer hour, but the essentially we would have to give up work on so many other important things to do something like this that it becomes a higher opportunity cost.
Well, not just systems. When we're talking about a system that's as involved as crafting.
Yeah, software is the big bottleneck.
And UI, and sometimes like UI art.
Yeah. There's
multiple
other dependencies,
disciplines.
but the one that stops us typically is programmer time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you talked about how it gets more expensive as the game gets older. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Oh, just a few different reasons actually. Part of it is that staffing needs kind of transition throughout the company as the game moves into more of a caretaker space instead of like a space where they're still like taking bigger risks. But then the bigger part is just that the systems connect to each other. Like crafting plugs into a bunch of different things. I mean, there's one that I'm really still hoping to talk about, which is the Dilex that like crafting kind of gets near, because any crafting rework has to think very hard about the health of the Dilex and how to support the health of the Dilex. Because if we did something like a big project like rework the crafting system and didn't use that opportunity to take a big swing at the Dilex, that'd be pretty crazy. And crafting also impacts everything to do with like re-engineering and upgrading, which are systems that like are very crafting like, but they're not quite crafting. And that's another issue that like if these things were designed today, a lot of them would be streamlined and put into under one roof, but now they're kind of scattered throughout the game with different resources and different mechanisms, and it just kind of creates this sprawl that increases the cost of the design and the implementation and the change.
Yeah.
And I think that not even when you're not talking about something like a major revamp, smaller systems still have that footprint. Every single thing that we put into the game comes with some level of maintenance concern. Hopefully we never have to touch things again, but that's almost never the case. Something that we implemented 9 years ago might suddenly come up and need to be tweaked in some subtle way because we want to do things slightly different.
Yep.
And so
And then
every
that subtle
time
way breaks 5 systems.
maybe that subtle way causes your EV suit to look completely different one day. Like who knew? Yeah, and that I think is another facet of what John was talking about. Every time we put something new into the game, it makes everything subsequently even if it's just a micro change, it costs more the longer the game lives. And the only way I think you can combat that is to start pulling things out. Nobody wants that.
So Jonathan brought it up and said he wanted to talk about it. So now we're going to do it. Let's talk a little bit about the Dilex. We have known for a while that we were coming up on the edge of a problem, and apparently the Oberth pushed it over the edge. That's the fan theory anyway. I told you that ship was trouble.
God, Jeremy, do you even remember when we first started? Like, I remember we had a meeting in Quarks about it. I want to say in 2018, like early 2018, but it might have been late 2017.
I remember
it was a
hearing
while
Jeremy
ago.
talk about it when he came back to STO from Magic in like 2016, 2017.
Yeah, before I even got here.
Yeah. I mean, it's always been a subject of conversation.
Yeah.
But like we started seriously ideating like what we wanted to do about it, like as a team ages ago. It's just that cost to change thing.
Yep.
We have a number of different ideas. I know I'm a big proponent of exponential scalars, where there's like an incremental benefit you can gain, but an exponential cost threshold to where you can push it as far up the hill as you want to push it. You can spend as much as you want to spend. It's not going to break anything, but you can kind of like show off your mastery of the economy or your wealth, and it just provides some kind of like flexible sink. And then we also want a bunch more systemic sinks. But the big, or at least I remember my point of view being that I really want to drive this by the top end of the market. So that way, people use the market to acquire the dilithium to pursue the extreme top end rather than something that's more flat across players. But then we also want a full court press. Like we want it everywhere as well. So it's just a complex thing. But.
Yeah, the game wide needs some more like standardized lithium sinks, and we talk about those. But yeah, I do agree with your statement that a lot of the what are perceived as problems or economic oddities that we want to try to smooth out or fix are really caused by the movers and shakers in the economy, the people that have a lot of dilithium or make a lot of Zen trades. And so I think we need to address both ends of that in different ways.
Caused by gets to be a kind of a loaded phrase at that point too, right? Like they're more where it's felt. It's caused by, a number of different like underlying systems. They're just the people who are at the nexus of where the dilithium flows the most.
Yeah, I guess not cause is the right word, but primary influencer.
Yeah. And then we run into another devil where like the bigger, more systemic market-driven solves are the more expensive solves. And the things that we can actually do are the solves that are more distributed through the game, but not really as capable of moving the like Bezos amounts of dilithium that we need to be able to move.
Yeah, we really need to find something that does what the Phoenix upgrades used to, and I guess don't as much anymore for whatever reason, of just encouraging people to regularly spend their deal instead of hoarding it. And we also, and we've talked about this internally, and this is going to be a less popular answer, but we need to also give y'all less dilithium. A lot of don't quote me on this because who knows what'll happen in the upcoming years, but we've been giving out a ton of bonus dilithium with every event, and that doesn't help.
Well,
I like the suggestion for the giant gold Naga statue, and I half jokingly pitched a dilithium asteroid cosmetic pet that just gets larger and larger as you dump more dill into it.
A dilithium moon at some point too.
That's all sounds great.
So it's a source and sink problem. You're right, Mike. And I looked into this a little bit, and in broad strokes, I can tell you that it goes back to kind of a development shift that happened around X4, Victory's Life, where we started just deciding that people want dilithium. This is obviously the thing that drives their gameplay. All the places that we reward dilithium are the things that they do. So we started putting dilithium in mission rewards in every TFO and all over the place, to the point where now I think that you'd be hard pressed to find something in STO that you can do that doesn't give you dilithium.
Yeah.
And that shift of reward mentality that happened around X4, you can kind of see it in our like lifetime charts of dilithium gains. It's like victory is life, and we've just been climbing ever since. And we didn't introduce at the same time anything really in the way of long-term sinks to combat that new source or that increased amount of source.
Someone was mentioning, I've been trying to think of dilithium sinks a lot, and sometimes my brain comes up with things that would definitely not work, which I don't pitch to you all. But somebody just mentioned how they have way more dilithium than they can ever refine, and my first thought was, well, what if we made them spend dilithium to refine dilithium? And I was like, that's the worst idea anyone's ever had.
Like,
it's on the list.
So there's a number of pieces to the puzzle, right? There's why should players value dilithium, which is an importantly different question than how do we get dilithium out of the economy? Like, what does it do? Why is it satisfying to have? And then separate from that, there's the like glut of dilithium that accumulates, because the longer the Dilex accumulates or stays in the state, the more there's like this sort of mountain of dilithium out there that's sort of devaluing it just by existing in this way that like radiates.
There's
And
also like
I'm a firm believer in the notion that like the pain that is expressed through the Dilex is like north of 90% driven by the market and isn't meaningfully addressable at a per player level. It has to be addressed at like a market movers and shakers large systemic way.
yeah.
And then the per player level is where it's more like it should feel good to spend dilithium. It shouldn't feel
Yeah.
like a tax. We got to find things
Right.
that like you're like happy when you get dilithium as opposed to experiencing the absence of an annoyance.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
getting dilithium should make you excited to go and spend dilithium,
Yes.
rather than keeping it all in your giant dilithium bank.
Hmm.
Someone
Yep.
mentioned you don't get dilithium for shit posting in ESD zone chat. We should make that cost dilithium. 100,000 dilithium to post something annoying. 10 billion dilithium to post something racist, homophobic, bigoted in any way.
I'm
And
taking
you
notes.
get banned. But 10 billion dilithium.
But we have talked about radical things like, like Jonathan was talking about, some sort of like infinitely scalable system of a progression that might be dilithium based. But we've also talked about account-wide refinement limits that might target basically large farmers without having too much of an impact on more casual players. I'm not sure if we do it. That might be too late in the game's lifespan for that, but we've talked about it. Yeah, so we want to do whatever we can to try and improve things, but every single idea, every single conversation comes back to the time that it would spend to actually do it, and what we aren't doing if we're doing that instead. I think a real easy example is I spend 24 hours of my 24 hours, 100% of my development time right now making ships,
Yeah.
and occasionally half-ass features that go out before they're supposed to. Oops. But for every one of those features that isn't a ship, which makes money, like ship equals money in the modern era of STO, every one of those ships that I'm not making is costing us what that time could be worth building a ship.
And to provide
And
some
it's a little cynical to bring it to burn it down to that point, but there's not many of us.
Yeah.
So every choice that we make about how to spend our time does have potentially a major impact on the livelihood of the project.
Yeah.
It's also one of
provide
those
some
things
more
where you really need to bust out a spreadsheet to like even describe the problem to people, which
Yeah.
always it poses communication challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To put a little more context to what Jeremy said about ships being money for us, because the game is free to play, we have to sell things in order to make the game. We can't, as Jonathan mentioned, everything we do has a cost associated with it, and that cost is paid by folks like you buying mostly starships. We sell a lot of other things, but the reason we put out so many starships is because they're what sells the best. If we put out a fancy uniform, it's different for every game. So like in Champions, costumes are like a reward and a spend thing that everybody wants. They want more costume pieces. Here in Star Trek land, y'all just don't buy costumes or bridges or weapons or anything like that as much as you buy ships, which makes sense because so much of Star Trek takes place on or around starships. Everybody loves the starship from their favorite Star Trek show. Somebody asked up above, Museroni, I believe, asked up above, how the decisions are made, what ships go where, whether it be C-Store or Lockbox or Infinity R&D. And, there's been a lot of things posted. Apparently, at some point, some number of years ago, someone on the development team said something about, ships will only go in a lockbox if they're ships that would be rare in the universe. I don't know who said that, and don't tell me who said that because it's not going to change anything, but that was never true. That was somebody who was trying to find a way to smooth over an incident, I think, but that was never true and is still not true.
Well, it might have been true at that point, but if I
maybe.
remember correctly, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Maybe.
And a lot changes.
But because ships drive so much of our economy and because we need to sell ships in order to pay people so they can eat food and feed their children, the uh, the decision on where a ship will go is based entirely on how much we think y'all will want it.
Hmm.
Pretty much, 100%.
Not
Not
not just
always,
that. Yeah.
but that's like the big deciding factor. If it's something I don't know how to say this and it doesn't sound cynical as hell, but in some ways the business of making money in video games is cynical. Dale Froman is coming with an economics argument that is actually has been proven many times to be untrue in our game. Selling more ships for less money isn't a thing that happens.
Hmm.
And that's proven over and over again by C-store ships like the Oberth, where people really like them, but they don't buy them as much as they go
Hmm.
after the big fancy ones that are inside lockboxes and R&D packs.
I
There's
could tell
also like
you.
an speaking of selling stuff for dill, there's like an order of operations issue too. While that giant glut of accumulated dill exists, we're really unlikely to make new stuff that gets sold for dill because it's
Yeah.
just going to chip away at the glacier and just get squished.
Yeah.
Yeah, and taking stuff that already like the Vanity Shield thing that Jeremy threw together quickly in a weekend to try and just put a band-aid on the problem.
Hmm.
It made a tiny dent, but then the dent was filled back in almost immediately.
Hmm.
Stuff that a lot of suggestions we get for things that could be dill sinks are like one-time purchases. Like you're gonna buy a starship once or maybe like 5 times if you've got so
Yeah.
much lithium. But you're not. It's not an over and over thing. The reason the Phoenix upgrades worked for so long is because there's something you need often enough, and and can will purchase over and over again because it's something
Yeah.
you as a captain need to use.
Hmm.
And so we need to find something like that.
And the big one I keep pushing isn't quite infinite, though. Infinite's also really good, because ones like that everyone needs a little bit of, they'll run out eventually. But the one I really want to see added that I think we don't have literally any of is exponential. Is ones where like if you are, the Grand Nagus and you have so much dilithium that you can ride into every room you enter on an avalanche of it, I would like you to have some ability to be rewarded in a unique way for that, but
Hmm.
also to get the dilithium out of the economy. At least sequester it in a bank somewhere, but ideally take it out of circulation and reward you with something.
Yeah.
But
And
even
so
then,
I don't think
there's
the exponential scalars even need to be very infinite because exponential scaling is really rough that way. Like
yeah.
just something to where, once you get your size 10 dilithium asteroid, you've removed an ungodly, pile of dilithium from the economy and everyone's much, much better off. Because like even a single purchase, like if you imagine the people who have the most dilithium and you get them to spend half their bank on I don't know, a dilithium moon, like that does more on its own than like probably most of the purchases we've talked about combined.
Hmm. Well, and this is a lesson that I learned very explicitly recently when when we changed over pass tokens to being a dilithium cost. Um, it has not been a sink. We probably could have figured this out with doing a little more diligence upfront in regards to how people already engaged with those systems. But changing it over to a dilithium cost, we couldn't charge more than what we currently. I know tons of people don't like the cost as high as it currently is, but even at its current price point, it's not sinking even 1% of the daily income out of the system. So it's very close to might as well not exist.
Yeah.
And this is something we've taken to heart. Any future dilithium changes that we make, any attempts at doing sinks in the future, we're going to make sure that it's something that you actually engage with, and also isn't going to be. In that case, we also learned an important lesson in that you can't just do a sink. You have to feel like you're getting something worthwhile,
Yeah.
and that we're
My
giving you
favorite
something
model
fun.
My favorite model sadly doesn't work in Stowe because there's no guilds in main tanks. But if you had like a whole guild of players who needed a main tank to be able to raid, then it becomes pretty easy to put a durability upgrade on the main tank, give it an exponential
Yeah,
cost and like a number of upgrade tiers, and the whole guild has to pull together to get like,
Yeah.
yeah,
enough dilithium to buy Zimbabwe, and then away they go.
I actually
right.
like the idea. I don't know if it is actually a dilithium moon, but somebody was saying they wouldn't buy something like that unless they can somehow win with it. But every TFO I've been in the last since we introduced 6 reputations, somebody has hit that button to show off how many tier 6 reputations they got. So I think if there was something where you could spend a crap ton of dilithium to show off how much dilithium you had and how rich you were, I think there's people who would go for it.
Ideally, you want something that does a little of it all.
Yeah.
Like something that gives, I mean, because when you have exponential cost but incremental power gain, the power gain isn't that unreasonable. Like if you're getting like a bit of extra power that you can't get anywhere else, the player who has everything is going to want it. And it's just a matter of finding a cost-benefit ratio that's not too onerous. But definitely, like, you have so many different sources of power on your ship that, like, an extra Stirfact bonus, you know, a Cat 2 bonus here or there isn't really a big deal.
Yeah.
But I do think it could be done purely cosmetically. I just think that, like, it would be more effective if it did a little of everything. The thing I'd really love to see done is make it feel more like a community effort. Like tie it to fleets somehow.
Yeah.
But now we're getting into the pipe dream phase where it's like less obvious how this would work.
Yeah.
But
Well,
if this
Thomas
was
has been
something
beating
that
the
people
drum.
pushing high into expert could do, or like put, you know, DPS league guys, like it's something where the whole team comes together to get some cool, super expensive thing that lets them do more than they could do before. That is, I think, the sweet spot. The problem is that our high end content is, you know, a little bit not so robust.
Yeah.
Well, and we sadly don't have completely robust analytics to show us that people that are sitting on mountains of dilithium are DPS chasers. Like we
Right.
kind of assume
they're often
that
not, yeah.
because there's probably a good amount of crossover, but we don't know quite how much.
It's sort of a social backend thing. Once the DPS chasers and the raw crunchy achievers get rewarded for having market moguls, then those people will start to recruit market moguls and try to like draw them into their social structures.
Right. If it's social,
And
yeah.
you might have like a silent partner in the DPS team who is just the Grand Nagus and hides in the back, and that's cool. It's great. It gets the community more knit together.
I'm actually now, as I think about it, more about this dilithium mood idea. I'm starting to like it more and more as like you could like because like you have the flourish thing that you could show off like the size a hologram of the size of your dilithium mood, but also then you get like a kit module that just crashes the mood into the fight you're in, and like the more dilithium you spent on it, the more loud and obnoxious the mood crashing into it is.
But it's a consumable power. If
Yep.
you use it to win, all that dilithium's gone, and you have to start building
start
a new
over
moon.
again.
Sephiroth's final smash, but it's Bezos and a big moon full of dilithium.
I don't know. This is not a bad idea. The other one that you were talking about fleets, Thomas has been pushing for probably a year now to get duty officers reduced or removed from fleet projects so that people can just start dumping their dill into it, which I think is a great idea. We just haven't had time to actually implement it.
Yeah,
Talking about old systems that make me crabby.
yeah. There's also a question mark there that I don't know how big of an issue it is because we haven't had time to research it. But like, if we pull duty officers out of the fleet system as a sink, and duty officers don't have a sink, and then they become a sink source problem that we have to decide whether to deal with and then how to deal with it. Sometimes just trying to solve one problem creates another. But I've actually become fond of saying that systems design, most of what we do is just deciding which problems to deal with on a daily basis. Like
The
many
Red
of
Queen's
them,
race is hard to win.
many of them we make for ourselves, if not
I was
all.
going to say, you and production have that in common, I think.
Yeah. What problems do we want today?
All right. Well, we've been at this for about an hour and a half. I really appreciate you folks taking the time and doing as deep a dive as you have. If you folks have more questions for them, we will undoubtedly have them back for another systems-focused stream at some point. But for right now, I am going to look for someone to raid. Jeremy, tell them a joke while they wait.
This is my cat.
That's a good cat. It's a good, better than a joke, probably.
This is my chunky cat. He's a big lovable boy. He's a big old chunk.
It's been a while.
I don't have any jokes ready. I just decided to
John
give them
Herlash, and this is KSTO bringing you the greatest hits of the 20th and 21st century.
All right. Fan art. I almost
I
forgot.
tried to
Thank
scroll
you.
up, but I couldn't find it.
Thank you to the person who reminded me. We will quickly go through this week's fan art before I sign off. Angaras sent us this awesome picture of his bridge officer team. He said this was based off of a squad from a game of Blades in the Dark, which, if you haven't played it, is a fantastic role-playing game. One of my favorites. Bentus sent us this shot that has been going around everywhere on the dev team today. It's the assimilated skeletons, if you guys can't see it. I love it. It's great. I've seen it in at least 4 different leads chats. Everyone's so excited by this. Definitely not intended feature.
Oh,
but
they
one
should
we're not
have
gonna
written.
fix.
They should have written resistance is spooky.
Joe Cool sent us this lineup of the ships they've ordered from GamePrint, which are all gorgeous. They specifically mentioned the one in the top right is their personal Kit Bash Constitution class, which I think is very pretty. Martin McGough sent us this Saru they made in the game the other day. That looks really good. Tim Parker Chambers sent us this. I assume this is... Yeah, I can see the red. This is the Mirror Gagarin. And they sent us this image of it, and that's a gorgeous shot. Really like it. Trexpert sent us this shot. They said, old enemies reunited. I think these are the two. This is the Dalkina and the Inquiry from the end of Picard. And finally, Velocitore sent us this beautiful shot of the original Connie hanging out in space.
Always a classic.
All right. Well, it's been a while since we've done it, so let's go raid Nord, because he's a good guy and we like him. Oops, keyboard is freaking out. Okay, it is just spelled Grumpy Old Nord. Great. But for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jeremy and John, so much for joining us. And we will see y'all next time. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. 3, 2, 1.